Hey guys, so I'm pretty sure I said in my last video that that was going to be my last Suicide Prevention Month topic video, but I thought of another one, so we're going to do one more Suicide Prevention Month topic today. And this is something that I've already made a video about. I made a video about it last year around this time, but I kind of wanted to talk about it again because I think it's something that's really important. So today we're going to talk about safety contracts. And safety contracts, I think, are viewed very negatively, both by clients and therapists, and I totally understand why. However, I have a safety contract that I find extremely helpful, but I've also had to do a safety contract in the past that I have found completely unhelpful. So I want to kind of talk about the two experiences and what was different and what made one of them bad and what made one of them a lot better and actually really helpful for me. So before I get into comparing the two, I'm just going to briefly go over what a safety contract is. It's basically exactly what it sounds like. So it is a contract that typically a client will make with a therapist that says that they're going to keep themselves safe. So typically these are things like they're not going to engage in any suicidal behaviors. So that includes like actually attempting suicide, as well as things that can prepare you for suicide. So like research, things like that. Typically are not allowed in a safety contract, and they're also commonly used for self-harm. So it's a contract where you are agreeing to not self-harm for a specific amount of time. So first I'm going to talk about my unhelpful safety contract. So I was in a dialectical behavior therapy intensive outpatient program. So basically what this is it's like super intense therapy. So it was 3 times a week for 3 hours each time. And it was about an 8-week program, and we specifically learned DBT skills. There's different types of intensive outpatient programs. This one was specifically skills-based. And I was asked to do a safety contract for this program. And I'm just going to kind of walk through how the safety contract came about and then why I didn't find it helpful. So I was asked to do a safety contract on my first day at the program. It was a virtual program, which also I feel like just made it kind of weird. But I met with the therapist who was kind of the head of the program, and she asked me a couple questions. We talked for a little bit, and then like the first thing that she said was, we have to make a safety contract for the next 8 weeks that you're in the program. So for the next 8 weeks, you have to agree to not self-harm and to not engage in any suicidal behavior. The reason I didn't find this helpful at all was it was extremely abrupt. This was the first time I had met this therapist, and she was immediately like, you got a contract for safety with me. And it was like weirdly required to be in the program, which to me was weird because it's like a very hard thing to enforce. But it was like required, and it was very much like forced on me by someone like I have no idea who this person is. Like, I've talked to you for about 20 minutes and you're asking me to make this like big agreement with you, and I have like no idea who you are. I don't feel like maybe this is just me, but like I didn't feel any like responsibility towards this person. Like, I didn't feel like making a contract with this person was really helpful for me, because like I was going to see this person for 8 weeks, wasn't even going to talk to them individually like ever again after that. So it didn't really matter to me, and it was forced. And then the other big thing about this contract was that it was one way. So it was nothing that the therapist had to agree to, and just 100% something that I had to agree to. And for me, this made me like pretty uncomfortable. And this is why a lot of people say that safety contracts don't work. And I completely understand why, because in this case, it made me feel like I couldn't talk about it if I was having a hard day in terms of self-harm or suicidal behaviors or thoughts. I felt like I couldn't talk about those, because if I said that I engaged in one, like I was going to get in trouble. I don't really know what would have happened. I believe I did engage in some of the behaviors I agreed not to, and I just didn't really say anything about it, because again, I was afraid to say something about it, because it was like this big thing that I had to agree to for the next 8 weeks. And that's why people think safety contracts don't work, because they make the client feel afraid to bring up these difficult things. Like if a client is engaging in self-harm or is starting to like think about suicide and is starting to prepare, it makes you feel like you can't talk about it because you're going to get in trouble because you're violating your contract. So I think that safety contracts, when they are done that way, when they are forced, when they are completely one-sided, and when they make the client feel afraid to speak up, that is when they don't work. So next I'm going to talk about my current safety contract and how it's different and why I think it's helpful. So I started seeing my therapist about 2.5 years ago, and I don't remember exactly when we made the first safety contract, but I know I've had, I think 3 in the time that I've seen him. We've made 3 safety contracts. The key points I'm going to hit on here are what made this safety contract feel a lot better to me and why I think this was helpful for me. The first thing was this was my individual therapist. So this was someone that I had kind of built a relationship with already before we even talked about safety contracts. So I had already been seeing him for an extended period of time. I don't remember the exact length of time, but we had already built a pretty good therapist-client relationship where I felt like when he brought the idea of the safety contract to me, I felt like, yeah, this is something that I can do because this is a person that I know is invested in helping me. And I feel some sense of, commitment towards this person to try to make the best use of our time together. And the best way to do that is to do my best to not engage in suicidal behaviors and self-harm. So I felt like I had a responsibility to kind of work with him on this, and it felt very personal to me, and it felt really good to do. So the next thing that I think made this safety contract a lot better than the one I mentioned previously was that it wasn't forced at all. My therapist brought up the idea to me, but he made it clear that this was my decision and that I did not have to have a safety contract. He told me that he would continue to see me if I didn't want to do a safety contract, like it would not affect anything at all. So it was 100% my decision on if I wanted to do it or not. He was just presenting me with the information and why he thought it might be helpful for me. So I wasn't forced into it, which I liked because then I had the agency to make the decision about doing the safety contract. And of course, because I'm making this video, I did choose to do the safety plan. So the biggest thing to me that I think made my safety plan feel so much better than the initial one was that there were things that I had to agree to, and there were also things that my therapist had to agree to. So for me, I had a list of things, and I'm not going to go through them all because I don't want to get too specific, but I had a list of things that I agreed not to do. Basically, these were not engage in suicidal behaviors. For me, this included planning, researching, gathering materials that I would need, and some other things. And then I also agreed to not engage in self-harm. And then the biggest overall goal of my safety contract was that I was agreeing to stay alive. This was the most important piece of the contract, was that I was going to stay alive no matter what it took to keep me there. I was going to do that. And I agreed to it for a set period of time. I have one currently, and that one currently goes until February. And in February, it says that we re-talk about the contract and decide if we want to renew it or not. So the things that my therapist had to agree to, and this was really important to me because this is what made me feel like I could have the safety contract and I could continue to talk about these things when they came up for me in therapy. So my therapist agreed to provide me with non-judgmental support regardless of the circumstances. So what this means is if I engaged in self-harm, I could tell him and he would help me through it, and he wouldn't be angry with me, and he wouldn't judge me for it. If I engaged in suicidal behavior, like I started to plan, I could tell him and he would help me through that and not judge me. And then the same thing, if I got something that I was planning on using to self-harm and I needed help getting rid of it, I could go to my therapist with that and he would help me get rid of it and he wouldn't judge me. One of the big things that I asked for in the safety contract was specifically to put that hospitalization is okay. Because to me, I viewed hospitalization as kind of a failure on my part because I needed the hospital in order to stay alive. And I felt like that was like violating the contract in some weird way, which it wasn't. But just to make me feel better, we put that one explicitly in there that if I asked to be hospitalized or I needed to be hospitalized, that was okay. And that did not violate the contract at all. So on a personal level here, my safety contract has helped me a lot. I'm going to be honest, when I initially made the safety contract, I was like, this is stupid. There's no way this is going to help me. Not true. Turns out I really, really like to honor my promises. And if those promises are in writing and signed and I have a deal with someone, I extra want to keep those promises. So there have been times where I've actually been in the process of thinking of self harming or thinking about suicide. And I have thought to myself, I have the safety contract. I can't do this. I'm going to talk to my therapist about it instead. And so it's helped me in that way. And then the part about hospitalization has helped me a ton because there have been so many times where I have felt completely out of control and like I couldn't handle things on my own and I needed a little bit of extra help. And I could look at my safety contract and be like, it says in here, it is totally fine for me to go to the hospital. My therapist is going to help me get to the hospital. He's not going to judge me. He's going to support me and help me through that. So my safety contract, I went into it thinking it wasn't going to do anything at all, and it turns out it's actually been extremely helpful for me. I mean, I've slipped up, I've engaged in the behaviors I've agreed not to, and anytime that's happened, my therapist and I have just had an honest conversation about it, where we, talked about what happened, how we can try to prevent it in the future, what are some skills I could use instead. But there's never been any judgment. I've never felt like made to feel bad because I, broke a part of the contract, because at the end of the day, the most important piece of that contract is that I am agreeing to stay alive. If I slip up, if I self-harm, if I plan for suicide, it's okay as long as I'm being honest and as long as I'm talking about it and as long as I'm continuing to get the help that I need. So that's pretty much it for today's video. So in summary, the reason why I found my safety contract to be so helpful was because I had a good relationship with my therapist already when we made the contract. The contract wasn't forced. I got to choose whether or not to do it. And that it was kind of a reciprocal contract where my therapist had things that he had to agree to and I had things that I had to agree to. So it didn't feel like a weird power dynamic thing. It kind of felt like we're both working on my mental health together and we're both working towards helping me become better overall. So because we're working on the shared goal, there are some shared things that we both need to make sure that we're doing so that way we can put all of our effort into my recovery. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions about safety contracts, even if you want a rough outline of a safety contract of what mine looks like, I'm more than happy to share that. Please just leave me a comment and I will figure out the best way to get that to you. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.